Welcome to the Zandbergen Report, where wealth strategies and pop culture collide, featuring your distinguished host and certified financial planner, Bart Zandbergen.
Welcome to our show of Dream Chasers and Wealth Makers. We are thrilled to be back in the studio today with a new episode of the Zandbergen Report. I'm proud to bring in the movers, shakers, and difference makers who are passionate about sharing what they have learned and what you need to know today. And today I have a very special guest, David Rutherford. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Bart. When John reached out and said, my God, there's another guy who wants to have you on the show, I was super fired up. And then when I went to your website and started listening to some of the shows, I was like, God, this guy is the real deal right now, man. So it's not often that I get my nerves flip a little bit, but coming on your show, I want to make sure I perform at my best. So I'm so honored that you'd want to have me on your show, Bart. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. And just to be fully transparent, the feeling is mutual. I got a little bit flustered too with your background. So we're equally matched here.
Awesome.
And I think the best intro is I'm just going to read your bio. I don't often read, but it's just so good. I'm just going to read it and then we'll get into the show.
Roger that.
David is an internationally known motivational speaker, best-selling author, world championship performance coach, and award-winning podcast host. David spent 8 years in the Naval Special Warfare community. He was a SEAL operator, combat paramedic, and instructor during his time in the teams. Since his honorable discharge as a Navy SEAL, he continued to hone his skill sets as an international training and curriculum specialist for Blackwater. David was eventually recruited by the CIA, where he served as a training and security specialist, deploying many times overseas in high-threat environments. Since his departure from serving our nation in the highest manner, David has gone on to become one of the most sought-after motivational speakers in the country, averaging over 50 events a year. He has written several books for kids and adults. In recent years, David has experienced his behavioral training and performance coaching to individuals and teams, which include the collegiate 2018 World Series champion Oregon State Beavers, and most notably the 2018 World Series champion Boston Red Sox. He is also an award-winning podcast host and has reached over 50 million people around the world with his Froglogic message. That is an intro. That's why I was intimidated.
Awesome. Thank you.
And again, in transparency, I think if I was ever to live my life over, it would have gone down the path of like CIA special agent. That's what really.
I hear that a lot. But I'm here to tell you it's not as glamorous as you think. I'll tell you that for sure.
I'm quite certain about that, but it dramatizes well on TV.
That's right. Yeah, they always make it look super sexy on TV. What they don't tell you about is sleeping in the dirt for 5 days, or they don't tell you about the fact that every single meeting that you're involved in is a meeting you can get blown up or killed, and that's kind of the nitty gritty of it. I mean, I'll even tell you when I first left college to pursue special operations, man, I had this completely different idea of what it was, right? Back then there weren't a million movies, a million podcasts, a million stuff about it. So, my frame of reference was Rogue Warrior by Dick Marcinko and a couple Vietnam books, and the Charlie Sheen movie. Where they make everything look so cool, and they don't tell you about the freezing cold water and the endless joint pain, and then the unfortunate long-term effects of operator syndrome and what the exposure to it can do. Yeah, so.
Well, what made me most concerned is, and I don't know if you've ever met him, but David Goggins.
Oh yeah, I mean Marcus and David. I was on a big podcast with Marcus Luttrell called the Team Never Quit podcast. And it was this great show where we interviewed people from all walks of life, and they came on and they told their greatest never quit story. And so Marcus and David were very close friends. In fact, David's whole journey began with Marcus and his experience during Red Wings and being that down man and by himself and running from the Taliban and being protected in that village. And so that's what inspired David to change his life and pursue what's the easiest way to describe David's quest is to seek out his transcendental formation through the willing acceptance of pain, right? And so when we first started, in the first 6 months, within 6 months, iTunes podcast had rated us top podcast of 2016, and one of those big episodes was David, and that's where kind of we coined the term Goggins, and we had him on 3 more times subsequently. One more time prior to the Joe Rogan blowout, and then one after the Joe Rogan when his book came out. And he's a remarkable human being. A lot of people in our community don't understand David, but I've had the incredible fortune of being around him, interviewing him, and then, reading his book. You really understand, you begin to understand this quest, right? This quest for enlightenment through his pain, right? Almost to alleviate the pain he suffered as a child from his father through the willingness of acceptance of his own pain. And really just amazing guy. Yeah. I love Goggins.
Yeah. His book is amazing. And I follow him now on social media, and I mean, his passion and his discipline are beyond, anyone that I think I've come across. So
he's an animal. And what's interesting, when you begin to really look at that high level elite performance, really people that break through the typical constraints of performance thresholds, right? Those are the operators, those are the athletes, those are the men such as yourself within your specific fields who become obsessed, and you become obsessed with being the best. And that obsession, although for most people it has a negative undertone to it, for people like you and I who evaluate the pursuit of perfection in its entirety, and not just in the singularity of your own personal limitations and those interpretations, right? But when you really dig in and what is driving a human being to just do the things that they're doing, it becomes just a staggering way to awaken the potentiality within yourself and within the human speed, within the human condition itself.
I mean, who in the world would imagine doing 24 hours straight of pull-ups till your hands are raw? That is just bananas.
David, it was funny when I was doing the research to interview him. I went out and I found this one thing that he had mentioned, and it was they're called the marathon monks, and it was a Japanese monastery where your objective was to run 1,000 miles in a year. And they had to do that for 10 consecutive years. And if they wouldn't hit it, there's stories of these monks committing hara-kiri on their journey, right? Of disemboweling themselves because they didn't hit the quest of what that feels like. And that was a profound inspiration to David, and as well as Marcus's story. Why didn't Marcus quit and under that duress? But it really speaks volume, I believe, as to, when people are locked within these transformative, traumatic circumstances, how they get out of them. And each person is so beautifully unique. That's why, I don't know if you follow on Instagram, there's this wonderful person out there called the Humans of New York. And they have these just beautiful stories about regular people and their ability to overcome these extenuating circumstances. And that's, to put it mildly, in many cases. And so you begin to, as a person that, doing what I do for a living now, to really try and understand, what about us enables us to drive on. Right. And I always say, people like, well, what is Froglogic and what do you try and do for people? And now I kind of describe it like this. I try and help people restructure their perception of pain. And that's a result of knowing guys like David and doing the Never Quit podcast and doing all, and exposing my own life to the SEAL teams, to the CIA, to Blackwater, and, to do performance coaching, so it's a pretty crazy thing when you begin to, everybody wants to take a step back and watch and evaluate and say, God, those people are crazy. But if you actually do the due diligence and try and ask yourself, why are they doing it? Man, that's where the great lessons of life begin to appear.
Okay. And is that how you dive down into the kind of the reevaluation of pain? Is that logic right there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Well, it really started for me. I mean, I didn't understand pain. I grew up in Boca Raton, Florida. My father was an attorney. I went to prep schools and silver spoon in my mouth since day one, and didn't have a care in the world, didn't have a pain in the world other than, maybe 2-a-days in football practice in August, right? That was my greatest
Yeah.
pain I felt. And then, going to college and having my dream of wanting to play, top level football collapse and not being prepared to handle what that felt like. I quickly realized that I was ill-equipped. I didn't understand pain, and it was in the derivative of fear itself, right? I didn't understand why I was so afraid to fail, why I was so afraid of the unknown, why I was so afraid of my future. And luckily, in that time, I really opened up my cognition and began to seek out some answers. And when you read Descartes for the first time and you actually try and, sit down and understand why a dude would go, into the woods for, 10 years to try and figure stuff out, you're like, God, that sounds horrible. But then you realize the process it takes to come to some form of understanding of this thing we call the human condition. Man, you have to dive deep into those things which life are imbued with. And unequivocally, there is nobody that will, ever sit down and in a rational, logical discussion with anybody say that pain and suffering aren't a massive component of our experience. And so with that, you start to read the amazing stories, the positive stories, the Viktor Frankl stories, right? Where, a guy survives Auschwitz and Dachau and the concentration camps, or you read Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelagos, and you realize how you survive the gulags of Stalinist Russia. And you really see a whole different context applied over your interpretation of life. And that is the ability to restructure pain in a way that becomes inspiring. And that's what I think Goggins has figured out how to do for himself. And I think that's what the real context for the rest of it, the challenge for the rest of us. I mean, hell, look at what we just came through over the last 2 years, this existential shift in our perception of reality. In pain, just nonstop pain. I mean, just the fact that I don't have to get on an airplane anymore and put a mask on my face, even though it's a small pain comparative to what I've gone through, it's elation at the highest level. And now for the next 10 years of my life where I'm traveling, I'll always look back at, well, at least I don't have a mask on my face, right? So it's all about that perception of it.
Right. I can't even imagine the pressure that you must have experienced in your past careers. What would you say is your number one tip for staying calm under pressure in any environment?
Oh, wow. I'm biologically, cognitively, emotionally, which one do you want?
Oh, let's hit them all.
Okay. Biologically, it's a pretty simple thing. Pressure or stress or whatever word you want to use that elicits a different physiological response. We call it a limbic response, right? That's because primarily what's happening is you're confronted with a significant challenge. You perceive that challenge to be a threat of some kind. And immediately deep within the core root of your gray matter there, you got these two beautiful things called the amygdalas. They trigger, your pulse rate spikes, all the blood dumps to your major muscle groups. It moves away from your stomach. And you are prepared. And the big thing that's happening, right? And the big consequence of this is, you are consumed with norepi, epi, adrenaline. And then the real, significant one is the cortisol that your brain just dumps throughout all your your neuroplasticity, and what that effect that has. And it primes you for a response. So in our world, if that response gets over, we're in real good shape when you're in. So, you start going over 140, 150 beats per minute, and you start having a battle in your brain. Your prefrontal cortex and your limbic system are fighting for control over your physical reaction. And most of the time, if you get too far over particular beats per minute, or you haven't had a grand exposure to what we call stress inoculation, then your limbic will take control. And at that point, unless you get your breathing under control and slow your heart rate down, you're in real trouble. So physiologically, number one thing we talk about is we talk about the pregnant pause, right? That moment right before you're going to go into a room where there's potentially a bunch of guys who want to kill you, or right, you're about ready to step into a batter's box for game 5 of the World Series, right?
Yeah.
Or you're about ready to do a trade that is worth $1 billion, right? You know, that moment where you're like,
Yeah.
And you take that pregnant pause, get that deep diaphoretic breathing going, try and pull that pulse rate down, and regain that focus, that place within your prefrontal cortex that allows you to think clearly, deductively, and rationally in a way that can be more predictive of what your actions will lead to, right? So that's physiologically. Mentally, it's about preparation. I mean, there's no other way to put it. I always love to pop people's balloons of performance, if you will, because everybody wants to believe there's this magic, like Superman rise to the occasion, right? The fantastic mom moment where, you know, the car runs over the baby and you lift the car off the baby, and, you know, you save the day, and that's not how it happens, unfortunately. And we've tested this in every possible scenario you can think of. You know, what happens when you're confronted with major stress, major challenges, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever they are, you fall back on your last level of training. And so if your training regimen doesn't have you adequately prepared to handle the circumstance that you have willingly placed yourself into, or, right, and the ones that are the most difficult, when they catch you by surprise, that external insurgency hitting you, you know, and you're just like, whoa. And you're like, you know, the cutoff, the road rage on I-5 out there, or being out in the water. You know, I remember being, I know you live in Laguna, and, you know, one of my favorite places to surf is right down there beneath the Ritz there. And I remember being a kid out there with my parents and paddling out in the water, and, you know, dropped in on a wave I shouldn't have been on and cut some local off. And he came over and grabbed my board and like took my leash and sent it in. And he's like, get out, you know, and I'm like, oh, you know, and I was untrained for that circumstance. Now I would have grabbed him and, you know, take him to the bottom for a little, a little bottom sample, but you know, it's training. And it's that training that's imperative. Whatever you're engaged in, if you haven't trained or exposed yourself to the probability of stressors that you're going to confront, cognitively, you will not respond in the way you hope you do. Emotionally, the biggest thing that we found is really rooted in kind of the concept of cognitive behavioral therapy within psychology. It's taking the things that really elicit the greatest emotional responses, right? Those traumas, those relationships, the betrayals you've gone through in your life, and breaking those down, doing the deep dive psychologically to deconstruct on a more cognitive level than emotional, to be able to really understand why you react, what is fueled, what rage, what sadness, what depression, what anxiety, and be able to understand those in depth. And then spiritually, obviously, you know, I mean, there's having just gone through Easter, there's a profound amount of lessons within, you know, all great religions out there. I believe, for me, you know, obviously I lean on my Christianity to pull myself out when I am in those dark spaces. And, you know, so it's a question of practice, and without those exposures and without those understandings, man, that I call it the negative insurgency. It will fry you every chance it gets, and twice on Tuesdays.
It occurs to me, especially the mentally and the preparation, I think most people's first response would be like for physical, like, you know, athletes preparing, and, you know, there's numerous stories about that. But I have to believe that preparation is also very important for for business people, right?
Oh
For
God, yes.
a business meeting, a negotiation, in a sales environment, in a whatever. If you're well prepared, right?
Well, I love how you talk about your clients. They were your friends. They were, you know, in some contexts, I bet you had relationships that were family almost. And so that integration, right? That preparation, that dedication, that development of rapport and trust, that's all invested, right? That's time you're investing to cultivate those relationships so that when that next, you know, when '08 happens and your clients are coming to you freaking out and you're saying, whoa, 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 pump the brakes. Listen, this doesn't change anything. Let's look at the historical trends of the market. You know, things will come back. It's, you know, you just got to weather the storm, or whatever advice you're giving, right? You're training them to deal with that because of that long-term commitment you've made, the investment you've made in those people. And I think a lot of times business people don't get that, especially after they get to a certain component. I mean, I laugh, man, after apparently, you know, after '08, every single organization, it seems like, slashed their training budgets. And now, you know, doing what I do now and working with First Trust, you know, I one of the first things I do when I go in to work with an advisor team is say, all right, let me look at your training profiles. What are you teaching? How are you teaching this next generation? How are you teaching this next generation that has no idea what the savings and loan crisis was like, who have no idea what 18% interest rates look like?
Yeah.
You know, how do you teach them to be prepared for this shift from the bull market to a bear market potentially that we're going to see, right? How do you shift with you know, consumer price index raising or the M2 number being so crazy? You know, how do you get them to deal with that or train themselves to understand the probabilities that they're going to have to face, at least, right? Not necessarily predictive of what the market will do or what their business will do, but how they get their people prepared to deal with it. And that's why so many people don't want to go back to the office right now, right? Because they don't want to have to go back in and relearn relearn the techniques that make living and working around other human beings more successful, right? They've already backed out of that. They're independent, they're isolated, and people feel very comfortable in that isolation, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's, you know, probably a conversation for another time, but I wonder if that's ever going to come full circle and come back. But yeah.
Well, you know, it is. You know how it's going to do. Once the analysts, those super freak brilliant people at MIT or Stanford, or, you know, the machine learning folks at Stanford get out and say, hey, let's evaluate productivity, you know,
Yeah.
and you see productivity and performance has dropped 40, 50, 60%. I mean, look at some of the big banks out there. They're like, no, you're done. You're back in the office. It's over. Come in.
Right.
Because they realize that productivity has taken because I mean, listen, I've known some of the most disciplined people on the planet, literally, like people that were as regimented as they were robots, right? These warriors that all they thought about doing for the last 20 years was going to war on their own, without peer influence, without oversight. They crumble, right? Because what is one of the fundamental principles behind discipline, right? Is structure. And what is the greatest structure that human beings are relying upon? It's the structure of collective affiliations, right? The societal requirements that human beings need with each other. And without those, I don't care who you are, man, we fall off. We find those things to distract ourselves, right? Those comfort zone behavioral patterns seem to run away from us, if you will.
Yeah. I'm going to segue to discipline. I was going to save that for last, but since you brought it up, discipline's a big part of my life, both, you know, personally and physical fitness, and also professionally, and how I work and how I invest and so forth. how important has discipline been in your background, your life, and how important should it be for others and their growth?
Well, I can tell you this. There is no doubt in my military mind or my civilian mind that without discipline, I have suffered immeasurably. Every single time in my life where discipline escaped me, I tumbled, if you will, into some very significant results. I battled depression on 2 separate occasions for multiple years at a time. And that's because I lost discipline, right? It affects you emotionally. When your life is chaotic and it's not in order, you're not grounded. You're not sure what's safe and what's not. And the very essence of the very essence of human existence is to try and bring some order out of the chaos, which is life, right? The chaos of relationships, the chaos of pursuing passions, or being lost, or being traumatized. Without some structure in place, it's very difficult for us to embark on the necessary journeys. And in these journeys I'm talking about, most importantly, are learning to embrace your fears, right? To recognize that, without discipline, fear will be immense. So, having those, the construct, the abstract understanding that I need to have order if I'm going to pursue any substantial potentiality.
Okay. I expected something like that.
Now, mind you, I was notorious as one of the least disciplined people. Now, there's a part of my personality is I'm an artist, right? I was an art major in college with a minor in poetry. So, don't laugh. I am a hippie who can kill you. So don't make fun of me. But so my mind works a little bit differently. Right. It is a little more chaotic. It is a little more creative. It is a little more. That's why Chana plays such a pivotal role in my life to help me with some of that structure. So I know I have that limitation.
Yeah.
So I have to work twice as hard to maintain those disciplinary attributes within my physical fitness, within my parenting, within my relationships. And so I get that. And so I have to work extra hard. So discipline is regardless of whatever your personality traits are or type, it plays a major role in how you're going to succeed or fail.
All right. Thanks for that. I'm going to go back to pressure. So what is the number one mistake, in your opinion, people make or tend to make under extreme pressure, and how can that mistake be avoided?
They react too fast. People we are, and this is something that I fought forever. And I really believed at one point when I was in the teams that this was something that could be alleviated, if you will. We are emotional creatures, right? It's the oldest component of our brain. It's the thing that has been passed down genetically, generationally, societally. It's what all the narratives that we find ourselves drawn to, the mythologies of our existence and civilization. We are sucked into these stories. We are sucked into these relationships, and it's all a derivative of our emotional state. And so when we get hit with that when, it's the old saying, right? Mike Tyson, one of my favorite lines ever. Everybody's got a plan until they get socked in the nose, right? And as a person that's been socked in my nose quite a bit in my life, I can tell you, everything goes blank when you're in that moment, like, oh my God. And so it's when you get hit with it, take that pregnant pause, take that breath, take a step back and evaluate the totality of the situation. We have another saying in the teams, and in special operations and in the agency and a lot of different places, don't run to your death. And there's a lot of things, when you have an emotional constitution where you're strong-willed, or even if you're weak-willed for that measure, when you get hit, man, the first thing is that fear is triggered. You go through a whole slew of emotions, and, you want to react. You want to be able to, one, create distance and space for whatever's attacking you, your perception of being attacked. And then it's a quick flurry, right? And you look at a whole different types of analysis across a bunch of different species. And we all have a way to react instantaneously to create a better protective, create a better protective reaction for ourselves. So take a second. You're going to react, but don't act. Take that pregnant pause, take that time. And if they're big and they're huge decisions and they're monstrous and will have reverberating effects across you and all the people that you love and care about, take as much time as you can before you absolutely have to make a decision.
Wow. I love that. That's awesome. How did serving in the CIA teach you to think on another level, critically and analytically?
Oh God, Jesus. I used to imagine myself to be a smart human being in some capacity prior to going to work for the agency. And for my first 2 years, I had the incredible opportunity to work with case officers. And the idea was to help them better integrate with the soft units they were working with downrange. And it was really a unique situation with how information was collected and then translated into actionable intelligence. And it was a real fluid situation, if you will. And so my initial thought was, I'm going to teach these really brilliant people how to act and think more like special operations guys. And my first experience was just comical. Like I was so arrogant is the only appropriate word, that's what my job was, that I almost got in some big trouble in my very first program that I was a part of. And luckily I had a guy, Chris Peranto, otherwise everybody knows him as Tonto. If you ever saw the movie 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi, Tonto was the guy who fought in his shorts, and really amazing guy, good friend of mine. And he, on one of my first gigs, was just like, "Hey, come here." And I'm like, "What's up, man?" He goes, "You're a Navy SEAL, huh?" I'm like, "Yep." And he's like, "You were an instructor too?" And I was like, "That's right, I was." And he goes, "Hey, man, you need to pump the brakes." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Let me explain to you how they work." And he gave me this insight that was pivotal for me to be able to shift my focus to where for the next 2 years, I just wanted to know everything I could know from these brilliant, brilliant human beings. When your job, think about this, and you can relate to this, I'm sure. Your job is to unpack, right, the intense motivations on why people want to do what they are going to do with their life's work, right? And as you know, people look at their money, they look at their skill sets, their profession, they look at their what they've accumulated, they covet it, right? They hold it with incredible conviction. And so what a case officer's job is to do is to interact, essentially, in the last 20 years in war on terror, to interact with our sworn ideological enemies, develop rapport, potentially make it to trust, and then get those human beings to give us information that potentially is going to lead to the annihilation of people they know, family members, people they care about, groups that they've been indoctrinated into. And when you begin to see how tactically proficient people are, and I'm not saying they all are, right? Nobody is comprehensively, but the people I got exposed to, man, these were people that blew me away. And from learning that process from them and how they assess an asset or a source or subsource or whatever, whoever they're working, even work with other foreign governments or whatever, our allies, to hear how they deconstruct the human condition in order to discover what is truly driving a human's motivational desire that was something that just totally shifted my entire approach to how I do what I do now.
Yeah. Yeah. If I really bring it down and dumb that down and simplify, and God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and use them appropriately, right? Listen, understand.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Oh, it was
So,
funny because I thought I was the man, and I was a joke. I would 1 combat deployment in the teams, 2 deployments total. I had a couple deployments and at Blackwater. I thought I was up here in terms of my knowledge, but I was maybe up here in this teeny little sliver of information, and then they opened this whole world up to me on what intelligence was. I mean, both figuratively and metaphorically, right?
yeah,
And literally as well too. So
yeah.
it was a wonderful experience. There are so many amazing human beings that work for the agency, and they're out there right now as we speak, grinding, living very, very difficult lives, and trying to keep America protected.
Great lead into my last question. We're in interesting times, right? Let's just, if I say it simply, do we go in World War III? Who knows? But with that said, what are your 3 top lessons learned on safety from your time as a SEAL and CIA, and how can that be applied to anyone's daily life?
Whew. Well, to give you an idea how much it means to me, I have 4 daughters, right? And my daughters, just this morning, I got to drive them to school, which I always love to do when I'm home and not on the road. And they have to recite these 22 missions. And every time and mission number 1 is safety first, I mean, there's the obvious understanding of safety across those 4 planes: physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, for sure. But when you get into the grander context of life in our experience, I mean, first and foremost, the number 1 thing that you have to be safe from is, I think, your construct of reality, your consciousness. And because if you look at what we're facing, we're in a mental health crisis, the likes that we haven't seen since late 1960s and early 1970s. And we had 100,000 overdoses last year. It could be 200. I mean, there's enough fentanyl to kill everybody in this country, multiple times over, and people are dropping like flies. In fact, there's a new drug that they're releasing called CIS, which is 100 times more lethal than fentanyl right now. So we're going to have people just dropping like flies. And you look at, why are people using so many drugs right now? Why are people alcoholism is skyrocketing. Is because of what we're going through. And then and then you look at teenage girls, suicide has increased by 50% last year. I mean, that's devastating to me. And so safety first in my mind is to really figure out how to get a good grasp of what your reality is, what you can control, versus what you can't control. Because what we see is there's been enough fear introduced into our society, into globally, to last a lifetime. Now, I always take a step and pump the brakes a little bit contextually, because all you got to do is look at Stalinist Russia, look at World War II, look at Mao's China. That's the kind of fear that we can't even comprehend right now. So I always pump the brakes, right? So safety and how you perceive reality. The other is, your daily routine. That's the biggest place that you can develop safety consciousness, right? Eat right. Sleep, first and foremost, sleep right. If you're not sleeping, you're going to be exposed greater than any other thing. Eating right? Consuming the right things, being active, socialization with the right people that are not fundamentally negative across the board. And in many cases, it's not even on their own accord. It's just they've had so much fear pumped down, into their psychology that it's their psyche is off canter right now. So, understanding your consciousness, your daily routine. And then the biggest one is really, again, it goes back to not rushing in. There's a lot right now that I'm seeing because of the polarization, because of the fears, the medical fears, the geopolitical fears, the business, where the market's going fears, is not to everybody searching for some type of, see, I told you so moment. And that's just not how history, what history teaches us how to react to it. Again, it's patience. It's patience and establishing, to go back to the beginning of what I talked to restructure your perception of pain, to realize that the suffering you're in is much of it is way outside of your control. So the critical thing to make you more safe, learn to understand why you're suffering, why the pain is changing, allowing you to go down those rabbit holes of fear and the other affiliated emotions within that.
So interesting. So interesting. I wish we had 2 more hours because I could definitely fill them, but maybe that's for another day. How does that sound?
Bart, I'm all yours, man. Anytime you ask me to come back on, I would be more than happy to.
Oh, that would be amazing. But I think I do need to ask one last very important question. That is, what are your guilty pleasures?
Oh, Jesus. What is it? A good 14-year-old scotch that was made in rum cask, right? What is it? Balvenie 14 or whatever it is. I love that.
Okay.
I love kind of avant-garde music. I love to get into kind of that creative space within there. It drives my kids nuts, right? The kid
out again.
That's right. It totally does. When I put on, Richie Havens playing for 4 hours at Woodstock, they're like, turn it off, right? They want Taylor Swift and Katy Perry all day. And then I think the last kind of guilty pleasure I have is, I at night, once our day has settled, I can kind of turn down my hypervigilance a little bit, and I can just get into some really, explorative conversations with Jana. She indulges my eccentricities. She indulges my questions about, life and space and time and our physical reality. And I can't thank her enough, because a lot of people, they're so exhausted. I mean, she's running a household. She's got 4 kids. She's taking care of me. She helps me in the business, right? She's got to deal with me. She's got to keep herself fit and healthy and all this stuff. And then she allows me to just take her down these rabbit holes of just, what are intense, very intense questions and ideas in order to help me kind of continue to try and figure this whole thing out. So that's my favorite one.
Wow. That's a good one. And just to be a counter to that, my wife knows not to ask me any important questions after 7 p.m. because my brain is as much. I have no response. Any response is not valid. Or
you got to know what you know, right?
She's even trained my daughter. My 6-year-old asked me something, and she goes, it's after 7. Don't ask Papa those questions. I'm not gonna let Jana listen to the last part of this podcast, because she might implement that rule and I'd be done. I'd have to go wake the kids up. David, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great experience.
Bart, the pleasure's mine. We are in challenging times. And I just, my mission in life is just to, try and give a person one concept to explore, and any one of these ideas, any one of these concepts that, they're nothing new. I'm not any, savant of intellectual savant or philosophical savant, but these are ideas that need to be put into practice, and they need to be explored within all of us. And so the fact that you want to give me that opportunity to share these with people is a real blessing. So thank you, sir.
My pleasure. I want to thank everyone who has tuned in. We look forward to being back in the studio again next week. Cheers.
Tune in next week for the latest edition of the Zandbergen Report, Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Catch up on our recent shows by visiting podcast.bartzandbergen.com. The Zandbergen Report is also available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Interested in being a featured guest on our show, or have a question you'd like to hear us answer? Email podcast@bartzandbergen.com. The contents of this podcast episode do not constitute an offer of securities or a solicitation of an offer to buy securities, and may not be relied upon in making an investment decision related to any investment offering Access Wealth Management LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Access does not warrant the accuracy or completeness of the information contained herein. Opinions are our current opinions and are subject to change without notice. Prices, quotes, rates are subject to change without notice. Generally, investments are not FDIC insured, not bank guaranteed, and may lose value. Brokerage services are offered through Tessera Capital, member FINRA.